So, as I told you guys in the message, the general gist of this is
Right.
like there's a huge thirst for knowledge from like, newer heathens to, the intermediate heathens, and I just thought it would be a good idea to try to facilitate, some actual discussion on heathen related topics. And I tried to pick discussions that can be relevant to people of multiple levels of competency in their practice. This is more of a, just a general discussion. I'm not trying to assert one way is correct over another way type sort of idea. Though this is the first one I've ever done like this, so I am open to input. We could go down the line. You guys can pick a topic that is kind of jumping out at you. Do you guys have a preference?
I'm all about structure when it comes to this type of thing. Personally, I'd say to go down the line and then just move around in the boxes like that way to keep flowy.
Clock, clockwise. All right, so we'll just go one topic at a time, and we'll go clockwise. After topics have been discussed, if there's time and desire afterwards, we can open up the remaining boxes for other people to come up and talk. Although I would prefer somebody up here be able to vouch for you if I don't personally know you. Just kind of a crowd control sort of measure. Otherwise, you can ask your questions from the chat and we will do our best. So, for the first topic, I figured I would start at like, the newer heathen, the newer pagan, deconstruction. It's something that we hear a lot, and it's even somewhat of a trend word these days, especially on TikTok. I mean, there's an entire community in TikTok just for deconstruction. And a lot of people just assume that's kind of, stepping away from the church into atheism. But true to its word, I mean, it really is just about breaking down a set of ideas. And it's an essential aspect of becoming a heathen or a pagan, because even if you're not religious, you're still going to have certain preconceived notions instilled on you by societal standards and norms. And rather than just saying, you should deconstruct from those Judeo Christian mindsets, I was wondering specifically where each of us deconstructed first. Like, I know just from watching lives with Kira that, she came from kind of a more free childhood background and wasn't really raised within that religious kind of household. Whereas me, um, I was, but I had to deconstruct my fear of hell. So I had to take apart Occam's razor before I could move further into any sort of actual spiritual path.
Well, and it's a complicated and complex topic, right? There's an interesting dichotomy when it comes to deconstruction. Myself was split between two families, right? So separated family from when I was younger. My mother, who was pagan, my father, who was Hispanic and Catholic. I never really had an issue deconstructing Catholicism because it was something that I used to pick. I literally went to church. It's not something that I ever really followed into. I followed much more closer to my mom's pagan beliefs, and she was specifically Celt. And then eventually, my adopted grandfather, when I was 15, 16, started teaching me about Forn Sid, or the Norse path. Um, so I didn't have much deconstruction to do when it came to religious or spirituality. I do think, especially in the United States, that a lot of people don't recognize is that a lot of our legislation, laws, and everything like that is based on Puritan ideals and Christian or Abrahamic ideology. So, really, it's much more complicated than let's worry about what religion you were, because they have to be able to go deeper. They have to be able to pick up the nuances of things that they do in their daily life that they picked up from growing up just within the United States. I think everybody, even myself, has, things that I had to look at, deconstruct through, especially when I got out of prison on that level, right? And that path looks different for everybody. One of the biggest things is, the recognition. Asatru Eric and I were talking about it earlier, and he brought up a good point. Was the recognition that within Norse specifically, there's only three things that could technically send you to what we would consider a bad spot to be in. Whereas within Christianity, Abrahamic belief systems, there's a lot more to it. And if people can't separate and start to deconstruct or do the work around what they grew up with, especially in the United States, that may be a Puritan ideal, such as one of the big ones is, oh, hey, that person's showing their body, so that's inherently sexual. Another one is, well, pride parades, that's filled with P3DOs, which this is just not necessarily the case, but a lot of that is based around Christianity, Abrahamic beliefs, and the Puritan ideology that this country was founded on. And it's deeply ingrained in this country, more than people recognize.
I agree with that. There's a lot of concepts when it comes to deconstructing Christian morality, Christian ideology, and Christian cultural upbringing that a lot of people don't necessarily think about would be part of that. The American view and the Western world's view specifically on how the family unit looks. A lot of the ideas on that you hear from people is very much so influenced by Abrahamic and Christian and Catholic practices and belief systems of how a family unit should practice, being the man is the head of the household and the woman is subservient in the kitchen type mindset, or the idea of a man has to be a certain way to present himself as the alpha within the situation and the alpha male within the society. Those types of thoughts and those types of practices do stem from the Abrahamic faith system, because when you look at pre-Christian worldviews and pre-Christian pagan practices from all over the world, coming from the Far East to the Middle East into Scandinavia and down around the Baltic Sea area and all the way over into the UK and in Native Indigenous practices, society was a lot more balanced when it came to thinking about a woman's role and a man's role within society. It was equal share and equal respect amongst each other. There was no subservient one within society, and there was no dominant one within society. Each person had some baser aspects of cultural things that were more appropriate for them to do, so to speak, not necessarily in that terminology, but it was a much broader concept of things. So we have to be careful within ourselves and the ideas that we're used to in society, especially in American society, on what we're bringing over into our pagan practices with Forensade and those concepts, and trying to understand and deconstruct and build a sense of base understanding of what the literature was talking about. Because you have to keep in mind, what they used a word for 2,000 years ago versus what we relate it to because of our understanding of it is going to be vastly different. So, deconstruction is one of the utmost important things that I think anyone should start their journey on doing. Self-reflection, self-understanding, and diving deeper into, why do I have these ideas, and where are these ideas really coming from? Are they really my beliefs, or are they coming from an indoctrination that's been happening for 2,000 years? And then from there, you can kind of find the things within the faith that contradict those ideas, and you can kind of start to see the areas that you need to start rethinking and reevaluating your thought process on.
So, for me, I was raised essentially agnostic or atheist, depending on your definition, because I've always had a connection with the unseen, the spirits. But I'd never believed in Sky Daddy. So I always called myself atheist, but I was more of an animist. I just didn't have a term for it. Even being raised that way, I was raised as a woman in a Christian society. They can say there's separation, there's not. So I did have to do some things, right? I had to, when you start walking these paths and you realize that there are other ways of thinking, I had to deconstruct my idea of what a God was, right? So I did not believe in an overarching, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-controlling God. And so when I was first pulled to this path, I was super resistant about working with deity because I hadn't deconstructed that. I didn't know I needed to, right? But I did, just from the influence of the society around me, I thought that was what a God was. So in order to deconstruct that, I just decided to approach it the same way I approached my relationship with any other being, my ancestors or the whites, right? I walked with them myself. I meditated. I got to know these beings for what they were. I did the deep dive myself. I created the reciprocal relationship with these beings. And so that helped me deconstruct this idea that I had in my head that didn't really come from an upbringing of that being pushed on me, but just this preconceived notion. So even if it's not a Christian deconstruction, there's still a deconstruction of ideas. Same with Puritan culture. We live in Puritan culture. I had to unravel a lot of things that I had held on to about sex and sexuality. And that was not based in religion really at all, but society, So reading the stories in which that was more liberal and knowing that I myself am a certain kind of being, right? And I had suppressed that for a really long time. It really helped me come into my own, reading these stories and understanding that my ideas around sex and sexuality didn't make me a bad person. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't broken, or I wasn't, a dirty, filthy sinner. It was just, I'm surrounded by a society that is trapped in this cage of understanding that they have not yet broken free from, right? Self-reflection, reflecting on your own beliefs, whether they are blatantly Christian beliefs or not. What beliefs do you hold true? Why do you hold those beliefs? Questioning the aspects of them. Like I said, why did I believe that deity was this thing, why was I so hesitant to create a relationship with deity? What were these ideas around sex and gender and all of these different things? Anything in your life, the way that you bring up your kids, why are you bringing them up the way you bring up? So reflecting and kind of letting go of the things that don't resonate with you. And it's easier said than done, right? But the about being a part of the heathen path is that you have the support here. You have people walking the exact same path. You have people who you can engage with that will have these conversations with you, will ask you the hard questions. Lilith is a great one for asking me the hard questions. Because again, it's deconstructing beliefs you hold from all aspects of your life, your childhood trauma, your religious upbringing, your societal upbringing. So, starting with reflection and then exploring those ideas and beliefs and why you hold them is honestly how I continue to deconstruct. And deconstruction is never done. Never, ever done. I'll say that too.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't think it's something that's ever done because we live with the egregores created within society. I don't think enough people understand the power of collective egregores that are thrown at us, especially in Western countries, through advertising, through politics, through political correctness, through social movements. And we get wrapped up in those. And whether we wish to dive into them or not is irrelevant to some point, because we are brought up with them in school. We're brought up with them when we go shopping. We're brought up with them when we go to movies and see entertainment or watch the news. Some level of deconstruction is always going to have to be present. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home where no path was pushed on me ever. My grandmother's the one who taught me, but it wasn't because I was told this is what you're going to do. I had a mother who married a Roman Catholic man who came from an indigenous family. So my indigenous background is something I'm just starting to look into and to bring into my practice. So I was fortunate that I was surrounded by people who are very open and very willing to discuss any spiritual practice or any religious belief that I, as a child, wished to explore for myself. I didn't have any boxes placed around me. And when I got to the age of 13, that's when I started asking questions about what I wanted to do and what my fit was and my belief was. And that's when I had that teaching that I was blessed enough to have and grow up with. But there was another element to it. I did live in the United Kingdom for almost 30 years. And it was a very different mindset amongst Norse pagan communities in the UK than I found when I came back again to the United States and go, whoa, okay, it's a very different sort of a viewpoint. And a lot of the stuff that I was lucky enough to know about, but yet miss out on that happened in the United States with the movement as it came through. I was in the UK during a lot of that time. So I was lucky to kind of miss it and look at it from the fringe, rather know what was going on, but also see it from a point of view of other countries and be able to travel Europe extensively and see their viewpoints as well, and not just see it from an American lens. And even in European countries, there's still a level of deconstruction because Abrahamic paths were there fully. It's not something that's exclusive to just the Americans, but we seem to be, as Americans, a bit more insular with what we get. And that view becomes very narrow and very targeted rather than our modern worldview, as Nance had said, versus the worldview of the people of the time where our lore has been written.
And before I move on to round two on that, real quickly, you said the word egregore, and for the benefit of everybody else, like my understanding of it is like a societal collective conscious, like around an idea. But I was curious, how would you describe that word?
So an egregore is technically, it begins as a thought form. It's a thought form. It's used in marketing and management. It's used in political campaigns. It's used in advertising. And it's also used in theological realms and religious groups. It's used in witchcraft. It's used in many different places, but it starts off very simply as a thought form. People have an idea. It becomes a like-minded idea that a group of people come together and say, hey, we want to affect change on a thing, or we want to produce an item that makes the public want it, desire it. We want to create fear so that people feel they need us, our protection. We need to be putting down the regulations, or that people will go along with the process. And as it becomes a group idea and a thought process and a thought form, it starts to take on individual shape. Individual people in the group start saying, okay, these are the elements we need. It's like marketing and management. It's been around forever and they still use it today. You have someone said, right, we want people to buy this item, or we want people, and I hate to say this, to take this medication, and we think it's good for them, and then we need to convince them that it's something they need to do. They have to create a process by which they can change the collective psyche to agree or to move with it. And then it takes on a life of its own once they set it free. You find the greatest example of it, yes, Santa Claus is one of them, but the pandemic was massive. That created massive egregores because you found people took the egregore that was given to them by the news and the media. They took it from social media. They took it from health officials. They took it from government officials. And then you found that there was neighbor hating neighbor. These people should be put in a camp because they're not willing to take the jab. These people are absolutely crazy because they are taking the jab and they're sheep. And that egregore gets fed then. It takes on a life of its own and begins to breed. And we aren't so much aware of that and how many times it affects our life on a daily basis. If you listen to the news or the radio or you watch a film, the egregores are built within there. Everything that is marketed to us is built upon a collective egregore.
Very well said. So I liked how almost all of you at some point touched on environmental deconstruction. Something because a lot of times, like I said, a lot of people, and I was watching the comments there for a bit of it. There's a lot of people who are, coming at it from once again, a Judeo-Christian mindset, but there's so many other elements of deconstruction. Like, for example, um, I was in a live a few weeks ago, and Gumps was in there, and he was, we were discussing, you know, from a historical perspective, women in Viking society. And Gums, speaks many languages. And the word kitchen came out, and this lady got really mad. And like, one, there's a bit of ethnocentrism coming from trying to judge, somebody who's discussing their negative or native culture for the non-native word he used to describe the idea. But the second thing is we were discussing gender roles, and that leads, I'm using that to lead into the second point of, so with these environmental factors, let's say you've never been Christian. How do you identify what areas need to be deconstructed? Because I use that as an example of, for myself, I use my anger as how I identify what I need to deconstruct. I have to stop and I have to say, why is this upsetting me? Why is this making me angry? I have to do personal reflection. But I'm just curious what other methods might be out there to identify areas that you find you still need to deconstruct.
That's a really good question. Love the complexity that we're getting into here. For myself, I could say at some points it's anger. At other points, it's something that doesn't come into perspective, or I don't catch it till later on, right? So I'll be in a conversation with somebody, and 2-3 days later, I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even think about that. Why did I react like this? So forth and so on. But I would agree that it's typically an elicited emotional response that will help somebody to take a step back and try to reflect on why they had that response, whether it be anger, whether it be sadness, whether it be, so many variants of things. One of the things that people I've been seeing in the comments, a few people were like, well, not everything about Christianity is bad, right? So I step back and I go, at no point have I heard most individuals on this platform say that Christianity is bad. What I see happen more often than not is individuals who come from a belief system like that, a structure like that, feel that Norse paganism doesn't have that and that it's something that they're missing. When in reality, if you do the deep dive, there is some doctrine and dogmatic practices within Fornseth and the Norse belief system. It's just not the same way as Christian, where people get upset. And Kara and I have had this conversation so many times. The word worship, right? The word itself doesn't upset me at all. It doesn't upset me at all because prayer is worship, right? Supplication could be worship, all that. Veneration could be worship. Words change over time. And the way that they're used, they change. So it's things like that I've had come up where I have to take a step back and kind of look at it and be like, okay, well, this, and this. The word itself doesn't upset me, but more often than not, people don't understand the difference between the context of that word from Christianity to Norse. And that's where it gets confusing for people. So I try not to get into the minutia of the definitions of these words that they're not comprehending or they're wanting to put in this place and say, this is what it is. By definition, this is, there's no way that they didn't do this, or this. And they tend to concentrate on just one section of time, right? And it typically is the Viking Age, the late Iron Age. They don't look prior to that, and they don't look after that. They don't understand that Christianity wasn't violently forced down people's throats, especially in Scandinavia, Iceland. It's something that happened over time. Did you have certain situations where it possibly was? Yes. However, historically and factually, no, it wasn't. It wasn't like the Catholic Church rolled up into, Sweden or Norway and said, you're all going to convert or we're going to condemn you to death because you're sinners. That's just not what it was. A lot of it had to do with economics, social, money, things like that. And even then, individuals within those tribes would be like, oh yeah, I'm Christian, and go home and worship the old ways. Worship the land with their ancestors, deities, and so forth. Really, the biggest thing that made me start deconstructing Heathen Nerd was recognizing that what I learned from my grandfather was all oral. And when I went to State Penn, all the books I read were from one particular group that has a huge foothold in the prison system, and then I had to go and reread everything because of the amount of BS that was in their literature. And not all of it was bad, right? There were some good things in their literature. There were some things that you could take knowledge from, but you still had to be able to dissect it and go, okay, this is a problem. Here's where it comes from. This traces back to here, here, and here, and that doesn't seem accurate, so I'm going to remove that. So I would state you're pretty on point. I think most of it is elicited emotional responses that will cause somebody, if they pay attention, to step back and really start the deconstruction process on a social level.
100%. Taking the time to really stop and slow down and think about the concepts and things that are sitting around you in your greater community is also a good way. Someone who kind of was, I'm not going to say I was necessarily fully raised within the practices, but I was raised with Icelandic and Norwegian traditions from my great grandmother who came from there. And being able to step back and take a broader look and breathe for a minute and just see and recognize what's going on around you in your broader community, you can start to see the areas and thoughts and ideas because of societal influence that might need to be deconstructed, that might need to be looked at. Where does that idea come from? Where does that concept and that thought process stem from, right? We see a lot of talk in the community of we need to worship the gods. We need to worship the gods. The Eddas are this and the Eddas are that. And looking at the literatures about the fables and stories of our ancestors, which were meant to be more kind of poetic jests at trying to explain scenarios and living life in situations that were happening around them as if they are a work of religious doctrine and a work of biblical proportions, right? You can stop for a minute and you can see the conversations that happen around you, and you can see within yourself where you might have some of those more Christianized ideas and leanings within your own thought process and practice when being brought into these conversations. So it gives you a little bit of reflection to really take a minute and think about the things that are in your own thought patterns, within your own family unit and your own morals and things like that have come from generations of your family, whether they're Christian or pagan or not. At some point from the last 2,000 years at least, there's mixing of those moralities and mixing of those Christian ideologies in there. And over time, the morals and things like that have set more of a precedence within the modern constructs of modern society tend to have leaned a little more from the Abrahamic side of things than our pagan things. And when we can sit back and reflect, we can really start to see the areas that we need to kind of deconstruct a little bit and work on ourselves. We can go, hey, I used to think this way and I know why I used to think that way now, and where does that really come from? It comes from this aspect of society, and how can I heal from that trauma within myself so that I can be a better example for myself, my kids, and my friends and kindred around me to lead by example with that deconstruction.
I am not one to slow down. So I'll just speak from my own experience. I'm not a Zen person. I'm not a chill person. I have zero chill. So for me, I am a super reactionary person. And so it's hard to be like, oh, where does this come from? But there are two that stand out to me as moments for opportunity, right? So anger is a big one. Like, like Overwatch mentioned. The other one is whenever I'm feeling caged or stifled, right? So whenever I'm feeling like I'm too big to fit in this box or this idea or this, whatever this is, I'm like, okay, well, where's the barrier coming from? Where's the why don't I fit here? What is this based in? Where is this societal? Is this my path? Is this, am I feeling, I explore what that is. So there's anger, there's being stifled, and then there's resistance. And that's my key one. When there's something I do not want to look at because it's going to be uncomfortable, that is usually the biggest indicator for me that I need to deconstruct something. Because deconstruction is not easy. I see a lot of people, the anger would probably be a really useful one, especially when it comes to, like, if they've left an Abrahamic tradition and they're still feeling resentment or hate or frustration with the past, and they haven't, if you're still hung up on those emotions surrounding your previous path, why, you gotta look a little bit closer at that. But yeah, that's really it for me. It's not easy for me to just stop and go, what? I need to be calm about this. I am not a calm person. But there are the three that I will look at. I will explore further. And then maybe as I grow older, because again, you never stop deconstructing. Maybe as I grow older, there will be other emotions that bring things up for me, like anxiety or something like that. I don't know. Who knows what'll come? But yeah, that's where I start.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo what Kira said. Absolutely, limits and resistance right there. For me, it's not anger ever. It's, I'm going to have my emotions. I honor each one of them, and I don't see that as something I've never had to deconstruct that within my spiritual practice. In what I do and the way I practice and the way I was taught, we honor each of those emotions. It may not be a deconstructed issue as far as the path is concerned. It may be a self-work that I need to do. For me, it may be a lesson I need to learn. It may need growth that I need to explore. And oddly, the older you get on your path, your lens becomes more used to what it is you practice and that you do because you've done it for so long. And the world doesn't stop changing just because you're sitting within your practice. You've got to open your mind. So limits and resistance are a huge thing, I think. Why am I limited to something? Is that because it's a deconstruction through those egregore societal norms? What is expected of us spiritually as a greater whole in the populace, not as Norse pagans? And how do we move that aside? And I see someone else said something, control. And I think that's another good point for people. I get a lot of people who've started off their path and they started off beautifully will come back to me and they'll say, I'm done. I'm through. I'm leaving the Norse path. I've been venerating the gods and goddesses. I've been doing my rituals. I've been doing my bloats. I've been doing my utaset. I've been doing everything, but they're not talking to me. None of my ancestors are talking to me. The deities aren't talking to me, and I'm done. And my first question then is going, okay, what part of your former spiritual path did you need to look at that was making you feel that you had to be picked up and go, hi, you little human, you're ever so important. I'm going to plop down in front of you today. What made you think that constant veneration and prayer meant you got a personal miracle or an answer? And what are you doing? Are you asking the right questions? It's not a matter of amount of time you're doing it, but are you being direct with what you're asking? Maybe you're getting answers and you're just not listening. Maybe what you're expecting to have as a response is not the response you're getting. And that is a deconstruction of the previous path that people been on, especially if it's one of the Abrahamic paths of, again, the different ways of venerating or prayer or worship. And again, I'm going to say, like Overwatch was talking about words, the meanings of words is a big thing with me because certain words do absolutely still make me itch to this day. And I struggle with it. I say veneration. You'll hear me say venerate rather than say prayer or supplicate. None of that's going to come out of my mouth. It's always going to be veneration. But is it really any different from prayer? Is it any different from worship? No, it's not. It's just a construct of words. And it may make my eyeballs itch, but I'm able to recognize why it makes my eyeballs itch because I always put it as a connotation, mixing it with an Abrahamic faith. Even though that wasn't something that I was brought up in, I can see that that's what that is. And then I go back and look, okay, wait a minute, we're really talking about the same things here. It's the energy, it's the feel, it's the vibration, it's the connection. It's all the same.
All right. I probably could do a very long discussion just off of deconstruction. But I feel like we should probably move on. We've already spent half an hour on this topic, but beforehand, does anybody have any saved rounds that they would like to add on deconstruction? All right, so moving on. The next one, do you honor the Vatir? And if so, how? And I thought this would be a fun question because similar deconstruction, now we're moving slightly up in proficiency in heathen and pagan practices. And a lot of times people come right in and they're just like, I feel like this God called me here. And they're very God centric. And it always seems that they go from very God centric, and after they've been on the path that they haven't ran away, then they go to the ancestors. And it seems that a lot of people forget in the middle there is like where a lot of your mundane requests, like when you're wanting that kind of effort, like what you would, and use this word, knowing full well what came before, but like when you're praying for something, like there's other, there's other avenues, and it's just not something that I see discussed a lot. So I thought it would be fun to kind of talk briefly about honoring the Vatir and how you personally go about it.
I absolutely was looking forward to this one. Every single day, I work with the Vetir. I personally am very, very conscientious, and people that know me well and have met me in person know this. I don't litter. If I quit smoking here recently, but I will put the butt in my pocket before I drop it on the ground, right? Every morning when I wake up and I go outside, I'm speaking with Land Vetir. Every time we garden, every time I work our property, every time I do carpentry, every time I do anything that has to do with the land not only around me, but in my area, I work with the Vetir on a daily basis. Speak to them. I even talk to the raccoon that used to sit on the stump across from us when we had coffee. I have my favorite little creatures that run along the fence line and mess with the dogs. One of them that I lovingly call Ratatusk, because he literally F's with my dogs every day and makes them collide into each other, and I think it's hysterical, and that little squirrel has its own reasons for doing exactly what it's doing. A lot of people definitely don't think about that. They do immediately when they come in here. It's about the deities, the deities, the deities. When, in my personal opinion, the way I was taught, I don't, and this isn't everybody has a different personal practice. I don't invite the deities into my home. They have never been invited into my home. I venerate them outside. I will venerate them in nature. I do not venerate them in my house. Yes, my altar is in my house, but when I work specifically with deities, I take my altar pieces that are specific to the deities outside to work with them. I don't do it in my house. To me, ancestry and Land Vetir are much more relevant to the practice. The deities are a much smaller part of it than some people think. Granted, they're especially in the sagas, the lore, right? The deities are obviously, they're in every single one of those, in every part of it. They're very centric to it. However, that doesn't mean that they are the most important piece of the practice. That's something that I will debate with somebody every day of the week. Now, do I have deities that I work with? Yes. However, by far, I venerate Land Vetir and ancestors on a much higher level.
I concur. I agree with that. Land Vetir are the pinnacle, I believe. Land Vetir and our ancestors, I believe, are the pinnacle of what the spiritual practices are actually about. The way I work with them is day-to-day thoughts. When I first wake up in the morning, when I'm taking a shower and I'm getting ready, washing away the day before and getting myself prepared, I'm thinking about my ancestors. I'm thinking about what I'm doing in my day that is going to lend positive frith and positive orlog to my family line and thinking about the actions and deeds that they did, that's inspiration to me in my life, which helps me connect to them. And then in turn, when I'm going about my day to day, whether I'm walking around work or outside or in nature, I'm thinking about the spirits that are there and respecting the spirits that are in those places, rather than just being disconnected from the reality that we are living in nature. Even if you're in a concrete box and you're living in the concrete jungle where streets are and buildings are, you're still out in nature technically. So there are spirits there, and they should be honored and respected. And then moving forward into a little sidebar subject with that is honoring the Landvetter and the spirits of my ancestors and the region of the world where they came from, as well as honoring the spirits and Landvetter in the region of the world that I'm currently living in that do not have the same spirits, as a way to be respectful to those spirits that are here. All those types of ideas are really great examples of how one could implement practice of getting involved with trying to connect with the Landvetter and the Housevetter and their ancestors. And, don't just take one person's word for it. Don't just take one person's point of view over it. Take everything in and take bits and pieces from everything and try it out. The only way you're going to figure it out and make a good connection is if you actively explore it and actively try it and find what works for you and feels right for you.
Yeah. So my practice before I was even heathen, like I said, I've always been kind of an animist. I've always felt the energy of the land around me. I call them my mountains because I have loved them and felt them since I was a child. My mountains have their own energy. Every tree has its own energy. Every animal has its own energy, and all of that is part of my Landvetter practice. I have bird feeders that I put out all the time, and it's very simple. Like, you can put out your honey and milk offerings or whatever people recommend, but like mine, I want to connect a little bit more and create like really personal relationships with these spirits. So I'll fill my bird feeders, and I raise native bees, and I'm working on creating my yard to be a certified wildlife habitat. And I garden and I hike as often as I freaking can, just sitting out under a tree and like connecting with that tree, meditating with that tree. I love meditating with trees, actually. I would highly recommend. But just walking in these different places. And when I travel, I try to go outside as often as possible. I try to connect with because it is different. It is different in every geographical location you go to. It's going to be different spirits. They're not the same. Even if you go to a hot spring, one part of the spring is going to be a different spirit than the other part of the spring. Getting your feet into a lake versus a river, everything has its own specific energy signature, and you can create a relationship there. A lot of the honoring that I do is like devotional acts, right? Like picking up litter, like I said, creating that habitat. So it's something that just, I know it's unfortunate really that it's so overlooked, but I think it's reflective of our society, right? We are completely disconnected from the world around us. Where does your food come from? Where does anything come from? The people are like telling each other jokingly, go touch grass, nerd, but they don't. They don't go outside. We're inside where it's warm. We've got AC or we've got heating. Like, go outside. Like, take your shoes off. Shoes are the worst. I get made fun of all the time because I'm an absolute hippie. I will rarely wear shoes. Also, a lot of my devotional, because also Yord is my main goddess, right? A lot of my practice is simply like using sustainable things, right? Like recycling, using beeswax wraps instead of plastic wraps, and using homemade cleaners. Like, I could get into a whole thing, but recognizing the spirit in the ingredients that you cook with, like, right? Like, just connecting deeper with the plants and the natural things around you is so wonderful. So wonderful. Like, and it's very easy. Honestly, I find it to be the easiest part of the practice, but that could be because of the way I was raised, my upbringing, and my natural connection to the elements, right? But yeah, like, You don't need to have a big fancy ritual. Just go outside. Go outside and connect. It's super easy. I also, like, I did want to say too that a lot of people don't know the reason that we connect with the land, right? Like, not only are they these spirits that exist there, but they were often seen as the guardians of that space. And so when you're connecting, you're also paying tribute, right? You're also acknowledging that that's not your space. You are on their land. They are allowing you to live there. If you are going on a hunt, you can ask for success on your hunt, bring an offering or connect in some way. Fishing, same thing. Like, so there's many reasons to engage in offerings to these yes, Scums, to these spirits, and they're not beyond your communication. I communicate. I'm like Overwatch. I will sit and I will, even when we were in Washington, there was this bird that kept coming up to the feeder and I was just talking shit to it. And the person that was next to me was just like, what are you doing? And I'm just talking with these creatures, right? Yes, exactly. I agree with Northwood's Kindred. But yeah, there's such a variety. It's not just the trees. It's not just the land, right? It is every little piece if you can find that connection.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that the connection with the Vatir and with our ancestors will always come first and foremost in my practice. Always. In everything I do, even with my Seder that I do. Always. That's how my connection is made. We see even in the anthropomorphic archaeology that's found, that was the case, taking the nature forms, the animal forms, and putting them into that very real connection between deity and humankind, and how that was worn and how that was used in those finds. And there's something that I'm going to mention that the great Mad Hatters said one time was, do you think when man Uga first walked out of the cave, he steps out of that cave and looks up to the night sky or looks out into a field and sees the animals running and thought of a deity's name? No, that's not how that was. Those names came from humankind. When they first came out, they were looking at what was keeping them alive. It was very much life or death, the spirit of the rain, the spirit of the river, the spirit of the sun, the mountain, the moons, the animals, their migration, the husbandry that was tracked through that. That was also very important to life and death. And we as a society have lost that connection to a large degree because we are able to go to grocery stores. And because we go shopping at shopping centers, we're not having to make our own cloth. We're not having to weave our own garments. We're not having to make our own bowls and our own utensils anymore, put our hands in that clay and in the earth using fire. We're not doing that to the same degree as we used to. And it literally was life or death for them to be out there. Healing, herbs, it was life or death. You are speaking to the herbs. Even if we grow herbs in our homes or we grow herbs outside, having that conversation with them, asking for the permission to take from them, to feed your family, to bring that nutrition and health within your home, or whether you're bringing those herbs in for healing. I think it's an incredibly important part of it. Sitting out, doing utaseta, where we're sitting out and not asking anything, but when was the last time many people just sat out in nature and didn't ask for a darn thing? Closed your mouth, let your mind open, and just listen. How many of the nature spirits do you think have waited for humankind to come back to them? They miss us. We don't talk to them as often as a whole as we used to. We used to be so innately connected to them, and we've now become disjointed from them. And with that comes all of the things of modern world and modern life, but also messes up with our spirituality, our connection, and us feeling like we are part of the whole. Same thing with ancestors. They're flesh of our flesh, blood of our blood, and bone of our bone. They're the first ones that are going to answer you. They know you innately. They're going to come to you first before any deity is going to come down and say, hey, you little human, you're the one. Your ancestors live within you. You are the result of them. And I think we miss the part of our ancestors and their connection with nature, that they did rely on it for that medicine, for that life or death. So not freezing to death, for survival, for fire, for food, for shelter, for clothing, for every aspect of it. And going back and doing something simple, as Kira said, and I totally agree. We have a sacred tree. We have an almost 300-year-old tree, lucky enough, on our property. And that is our sacred tree. It's as simple as just doing, I do Udaseta, sitting out next to that tree, and I'm not asking for anything except for I'll say, what can I do for you? And maybe I get the feeling that I need to go over and tend to this plant. Oh, or maybe I notice all of a sudden my herbs are not, doing as well as they should. Maybe they need a bit more water. Maybe I need to move one into shade. Maybe I need to move one into sun. But I always bring, it is the first thing I do in all of my practice. And even when I enter a space, if I'm going to enter a forest, if I'm going to enter a nature trail, if I'm going to enter a river, if I'm going to go walk through the mountains, I'm asking permission. I'm introducing myself before I go to all the spirit that is there and the energy that exists and saying, here I am, getting that permission to go in. So as to respect, because they're not always my local land spirits or water spirits. They are the spirits of the land that I'm going into. And maybe they don't like the fact I'm there. Maybe they don't want that encroachment. And how many people are in tune with, yes, well, we always say there's that dark part of the woods that you shouldn't go into. Well, maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe we didn't ask that permission. Maybe we didn't give that respect. Maybe it was accessible to us, but we just didn't ask for it beforehand or honor the fact that it existed to begin with.
Really enjoyed that last part. It sounds like a much more grown-up way to say something that I've said a lot of times when I was in the military before we'd go out and do field exercise, and it's that I love nature, but I am under no misconceptions that nature's going to love me back. All right, so round two on this question, because I feel like this is an area where it's going to be fun for us Americans because we have something that heathens who still live in their ancestral lands they might not have the perspective on. And it's the fact that our spirits here are so vastly different. So I kind of asked a phrasing of this in one of Eric's lives the other night, but how have you found any land spirits that you find that connect to like any sort of like cryptid or Native American lore or things like that where you can identify outside of our typical, you know, uh, heathen and pagan sources, and you can point at it and feel like, hey, I think that's what's in this set of woods.
That's an excellent question. So, granted, I just found out recently that apparently I'm a fake Mexican, but we could always get back to that. So I grew up in the Southwest, right? We had huge populace of Hopi, Navajo, and wow, I'm actually going to forget the other one. Apache, Hopi, Navajo. There's another one. Anyway, absolutely huge down there. And there are many, many times in the Southwest that I've been out, especially hunting, in the desert plains of Arizona where I grew up. Because I grew up in Apache Junction, Arizona. So we would go hunting out near, Strawberry for elk or things like that. We would go pig hunting down in Queen Creek and things like that. And there were some definite times when it is late at night and it is quiet and you were sitting around the fire, having a shot of whiskey or playing cards, where you could definitely pick up on landvetter that was not part of Norse. That was part of either the native tribes or the indigenous tribes of the area. We have had, I can't even count how many times I was told by one of my buddies who grew up on the reservation, specifically the Navajo reservation. I would go to drop him off, and it would be coming near nighttime, and he would say, dude, you got to get out of here. Like, you got to go. You're white. This land is not for you. This is not somewhere you want to be when night falls. And I can't tell you how many different times we had some very interesting encounters with parts of their culture, parts of their spirituality, and the way they live their life. Many, many times, whether that been skinwalkers, whether that be coyote spirits, whether that be the Hopi had kachinas, and there were times where, yeah, you definitely would pick up on that. We used to joke about Sasquatch, right, which is much bigger up in the Pacific Northwest where I live now than it was the Southwest. But even then, we would joke around about, seeing Sasquatch or Bigfoot and what that might look like, or other things that would pop up in those areas. That to sit there and say they were something else or that they weren't in existence, and to close off one's mind that much because of my own personal beliefs, would be denying knowledge, wisdom, and experience. And I don't think that benefits anybody. To hear my friends who lived on the reservations and get to know their families and know their traditions, even on the Hispanic side, the Mexican side, right? A big thing was La Llorona. Well, you could say that La Llorona in herself was not only an ancestor, but landveter. She went up and down the Rio Grande crying for her children, and if children were outside and she caught them, bye-bye children. And a big part of folklore down there. But I would definitely could look at something like La Llorona, Chupacabra, Skinwalkers as landveter to a tribe, to a people that were central in that area. And I would say they're definitely real. I've seen enough of it in my lifetime to deny something's existence would be not only arrogant, but ignorant, in my personal opinion.
All right. Dance, before you go real quick, I just want to say, because I'm starting to see the requests stack up, we're going to run through the topics, and then afterwards we're going to open up the remaining boxes and kind of have a bit of a heathen discussion, chat back and forth, free for all. I just wanted to address that real quick.
Right. We do see some examples of inner exchanging of some cultural ideas and cultural understanding of running into native indigenous spiritual ideas and Scandinavian ideas from Leif Erikson when he came over here, founded New Finland, and traveled down the East Coast down into South America and disappeared. We have a couple mentions from some people who went in the sagas of the Icelanders who went with him that mentioned great spiritual significant things that they encountered when they communicated with some of the native indigenous that were there on the East Coast, up in the Canadian wilderness on that side where they landed. And as they moved down before their ship disappeared and they went missing, they did have some records back and forth between Iceland and mainland America, Northern America, Turtle Island, and they mentioned some very spiritual predominant things that they noticed out in the bush, so to speak, with interactions with hunting experiences and the natural spirits of the land from this realm, the United States country region of North America and South America. They had some interactions there, and when we are honoring our vetter and we are doing those things here, it also kind of opens the doorway for some of those ancestral spirits from the indigenous communities that were here who are buried in the soil, buried deep in the ground. Their blood for at least 200,000 years or so has been soaked in this soil and lives very vibrantly within this land. And going to the lake, going to the stream, if you sit quietly enough, you can experience some of those types of energies and some of those spirits from those peoples very predominantly, especially in areas where there were major set communities of those peoples living on those lands and those riverbanks. Going down to northern and southern Carolina at the point where the mountains meet the river, where the Catawba, some of the people that I have lineage from on my mother's side, going and visiting there and visiting my cousin Coy in Arkansas and traveling to those regions, just fishing along the riverbanks and spending the night out there camping. There's some definite things that are not our landvetter as far as spirits and ideas from Norse perspective, but definitely experience some things that are very much so native indigenous. So yeah, there is a different type of feeling to those cultural happenings that happen from our traditions when you are introduced to the spirits from another tradition or another region of the world. And it's not just happening here; it happens all over the place. It doesn't matter where you go; you're always going to bump into other concepts and other spiritual beings when you're out in nature from those regions.
Yeah, and honestly, I kind of leave well enough alone. Like, there are a lot of people who will wander into these places because they've heard there's a lot of places like this in Utah, right? We have several indigenous tribes here. We have the Ute, obviously, the Paiute, the Shoshone, there's Navajo down south, Goshua. There's like 7 or 8 different groups, and they have a quite a lively culture here. And there are places that are known to be either sacred to them or they stay away, right? I know of many people that feel entitled to walk into those places, and they're like, I want to explore my curiosity, and it's just like, no, I'm not going to, And so I absolutely believe that these cryptid spirits could be tied to or are a vetir of some kind, but I don't believe that I have access to them. I also don't have the understanding and the history. I don't have the inheritance to know the stories, know how to communicate, how to honor, how not to offend. I'm absolutely going to fold on that and leave that to the people who have that inheritance, have that knowledge, have, years and years and years of that cultural understanding and the ties to the land that have not been broken, right? Because I don't have those. I can connect with what I'm connecting with, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. It's not for me, and that's okay. That's how I feel when it comes to those specific entities.
Yeah, I'll say that I had some very remarkable experiences that I had heavily ingrained on me at a young age from my father, who was worked for the Navajo Nation and lived on the edge of the res and was res police for the nation, and some spiritual experiences that he had and that he took further and that he was allowed into with the people that he was very close to. And as a child, there was a certain circumstance, those closest to me know about it. I don't talk about it publicly very often, but it left a very profound mark on me, a very profound level of literally fear, along with huge respect of the power and of the knowledge that was there. And I think that is why I go to great lengths, especially in the state that I'm in now. There's a lot of indigenous culture here that was heavily denigrated in bad ways, and that still is to this day. And I think when we walk into those spaces, we go with respect and understanding that just because we want to know a thing or do a thing doesn't mean we're entitled to know or do a thing. And asking that permission or getting that instruction, I think, is key to doing that. Working with the spirits that you have on your land and understanding where that they can, when you live in the United States and you understand where they come from, it is a relationship that you build over time. It doesn't happen when we move into a new home and you buy some land. The first thing you're doing, we do, is we go out and we make offerings and we try to create that exchange. We know where our boundaries are, where we're allowed and where we're not. And we know where their boundaries are, where they're allowed and not to come into our space. Sometimes that is a very real thing, to create that boundary. Some are not going to be benevolent. Some aren't going to be helpful to you, and creating that understanding of coexistence in peace with one another is what you want to do. You don't want the conflict to be there. So I think there's something to be said about respecting that not all spaces are always meant for us. We don't have the right to it. And even if we have the shamanic understanding of spirit and energy and entity and work with other people and other spiritualities, some things are not going to be available to us because those doors will be closed. And that's okay. There's other ways. You don't have to go through the front door all the time. I mean, we can see that in the sagas when we talk about them going to get Balder from hell, and trying to make that bargain, not going straight across and going through the main gate there and finding another way around. There are other ways to do certain things without bashing through that front gate and offending, being disrespectful and dishonorable to what already exists and is ancient.
All right. I once again very much enjoyed that go around, especially the focus on kind of that getting permission aspect. I think that's something a lot of people overlook when it comes, even if you're just a skeptic who's casually going about trying to find spirits. A lot of times, like I laugh when I mean, I believe most of them are fake, but like on TV, you always see like those ghost hunting shows, and some guy walks into the woods and just starts to like, like, come on, come at me, punk. And I'm just like, yo. But anyone have any saved rounds for question number two? All right, once again, moving up again in proficiency. This one, ritual ceremony, is it constructed for the gods or for us? So this one, this is probably, I tried to see if Seraphim would be interested in doing this, but she probably gets 80 billion messages a day because she's a female on the internet. Um, but because this is one of those things that it is highly blended between an academic perspective and a spiritual perspective. Like they've done studies on things like religious ceremonies, and they've done things. Well, they've done things for like religious ceremonies. They've done things for like exorcisms, and they've like measured the physiological effects within the brain and the body of what ceremonies have. And my question to you is, do you think that the way, because we have variations between how we do ceremonies from tribe to tribe, person to person, kin to kin, but there's a lot of the beats that are the same. Do you think that they're structured in a way to help us be more open to the spiritual experience, or do you think it's kind of like a calling card in order to catch the god's attention, or maybe it's both?
This is it because obviously, the Satu Eric is sitting right next to me, who's the Gothian, my tribe. As Jarl, I kind of was like, this question is intriguing to me because I can say it's both to a point, right? Yes, it's for tribe, but it's also for the gods, right? Like, and I love the way he explained it to me was, if not for the person leading the ritual being the vessel for the deities to reach out for that energy flow to go out, then then the tribe around it would not necessarily have the same experience. The structure of the ritual may not have the same experience. It may not go as well or as intense, or the energy may not be as intense. Where I also sat here and looked at it as just Jarl of a tribe, we're getting down to the essentials of Frith, right? Being built. And at that point, I don't see any of the deities within our pantheon basically being like, okay, well, you're not including anybody else in this. You're not, building Frith. It's just you by yourself. Well, at that point, then it's a personal ritual. Is it even the same thing as a ceremony at that point? Or is it just personal ritual and just for you? Whereas I see the structure and the way that it works, the rituals that we've done, not only with Eric, but with my cousin AD, to me, it's for both. I think that they have a duty that they perform within ritual, a space that they hold to intensify and to put out that energy to try to get the attention of the gods or goddesses during that ritual while we're doing that ritual. And every single ritual is different, right? And we don't have ritual that is the same constantly. Now, the structure may be similar, but the reason behind the ritual, there is a variance behind it every time, depending on what type of season we're in, what we discussed as a tribe, depending on what's going on. So when I think ceremonial ritual, I say it's definitely for both, because you're building Frith. I just think that it depends on what your place is in that ritual, on the variance and experience that you might have with it. I know at our wedding, Nans was there for it, Kiara was there for it. The ritual the night before our wedding, I can't even put into words how intense that was. I think that everybody left in a different mindset, with a very big boost in energy, with a very big sense of tranquility and calmness, as well as feeling a lot closer to everybody that was there. Right, there was definitely frit that was built to a big level during that ceremonial ritual. Now, granted, what we did after that added on to, because that's where we got to know each other a little bit more personally when it came to Sumble. But I do think that it is, I think it's for the days, and I think it's for those that attend the ritual, whether that be tribe, kin, family, or even if it's just friends. If you have those friends at your ritual, then you are including them in that experience.
I'd say I agree with like 90% of that. I'd also just like to add that it also depends on what ritual specifically is being performed, because there's more than just bloat and sumble and personal house bloat and those types of things. There's hand fasting rituals. There's Sade rituals within the practice. Um, there's personal rituals for asking the gods specifically for messages and things like that. So it just kind of depends on what the intended purpose and placement setting of the ritual is and what it's for. Like when we're doing our three big bloats through the year, in my eyes, those are both for the gods themselves and the ancestors, as well as the community that you're involved with, whether it be your kindred or your personal home, family, tight unit. Those specifically are both. And then when you're talking about things like high seat or mound sitting, those types of things are more for the community and not for the gods. Specifically to give messages and communicate from the gods directly to mankind for answers and those types of things. And then there's personal seat rituals within those practices as well, which are not for the gods at all. They're just specifically for the individual practitioner to build an understanding and be guided to the things that they need to do in their own spiritual path to remove blockages within themselves and things that are causing issues within their life and heal their soul parts, right? So it to me, it kind of really depends on what ritual is being performed and why, and that would kind of set the precedence of if this is going to be one for the gods and the community, or this is going to be more for just the community or for the gods. Like if I'm doing a personal bloat symbol to just one of the gods because I want to leave an offering for the god, that's not for me. That's me honoring that god, and those offerings are for that god. That ritual is for that god, to honor that god. But if I'm doing a bloat symbol to communicate with that god and build an understanding to get an answer from something, then it would be for me and not the god. So it just kind of depends.
And see, to me, ritual is all about space. It's all about changing space, whether that be your headspace. I have a personal ritual that I do before singing for an audience, for example. There's whether it's to if it's a grief ritual, if it's a alleviating your anxiety ritual, if it's a I'm going to do this so I can stop smoking ritual, whatever it is, ritual is all about changing space. And so for me, the structure of the ritual is typically to raise vibration. Raise vibration, take something from mundane to sacred, especially when we're talking about ceremonial ritual, right? I think that the structure of that is for both. It is for the people who are engaged in the ritual, whether that's solo or a group ritual. But in doing so, it then becomes the conduit to that connection. So it is structured for both, for the gods and for us. And it's kind of like they said, we're creating a sacred moment. We are creating these incredible bonds, and we are all together, especially in group ritual, getting to that much higher vibration and connecting with the divine. So everybody else really covered the rest.
Yeah, I'm along that same thought with everyone else. And there's a big, to me, it's different whether it's ceremonial or whether it's personal, and for the purpose that the ritual is being performed. I think it depends very much on that. And we've talked about, Nan's just talked about, is the save that's being done, is it being done ceremonial in a high seat ritual? Is it being done for the community, a small group of people, individuals, or for humankind as a whole? Are you doing something in your save practice that is for yourself, which can be equally as powerful as a group ritual? If you've got a good practitioner who's doing their art the way they should, it's equally as strong. It is equally as powerful. It is equally as connecting in energy, in frequency, and vibration, because what you're doing is raising that part of your soul that allows you to have that divine spark, to get into that energy, frequency, and vibration flow state that allows us to experience a part, a fraction, a portion of that divine energy, allows us to have that divine spark and divine connection, whether that's done with a group or whether that's done individual. So I do think it's 50-50 on how it's delivered. But if you're doing something, say, in ritual practice where you're galdering runes, you're not doing that for deities. You're not. You're doing that to understand a deeper knowledge, if you do rune practice, that you want to understand what those runes mean to you in your life and how you can use them in your walk and your path forward, or to help others, maybe in your community later, if you're doing it on your own. Or maybe you're doing, I know people who do great Galder work where they do echo Galdering. And I was just discussing this with another really good practitioner the other day, and how that echoing back and forth with a group of people, bouncing that energy back and forth, saying a Galder, having someone else sing a Galder, and it goes back and forth, creates this wonderful frenzy of energy. For what purpose? Is it for the group? Is it for the community? Or is it for that understanding of the self and of your connection to the divine, or your connection to nature, or to the Vitir, or to your ancestors? But I think it's exactly what Kira said. It's raising that to create that pathway for that conduit, for that connection. And I think it's equally as important that it's 50-50, and that it's equally as empowering if it's ceremonial or personal.
All right. So, by the way, ladies, you all are killing it every time you guys speak. I'm hearing things, and here's an example of how my brain works. So, Kira's talking about changing spaces, and realm, and both everyone's all touched on energy, but the way that you really emphasize on the energy. So, like when we changing spaces, like let's say when different temperature air changes spaces. Um, it actually creates a power indifference and it tries to equalize itself. And this is actually a force that we can feel. And then when we think about things like, say, deep sea divers, they can't just come all the way up. They have to slowly adjust themselves to that next level of pressure before they do, or else it can become overwhelming and potentially lethal. So, with this idea of changing spaces and this energy potentially being overwhelming, what advice would you have to a potential individual practitioner, or maybe a group of people who came to you in this theoretical and said, I'm thinking about doing this ritual, but changing the way that I do it?
I would tell them to go speak to a Gothi or Sedkona, because I am not that on that level, right? So my first thing would be go speak to someone, like Eric, Realm, Nans, my cousin 80, Mad Hattress, Northwoods Kindred. I mean, I can name so many people that I could look at and go, these are individuals that are Sedkonas, Gothis, that have a grasp on this at a higher level than I do, right? Again, I'm huge tribal. I do what I do for my tribe as Jarl, right? And though I understand energy work because I've done it, right? It's part of my family, it's something that my family has done for a long time. And I do it in my own personal practices. To give that type of advice, I always would direct that new Norse pagan to a spiritual advisor, leader, individual that I know could give good guidance, because that is how it should be directed to, in my personal opinion. Too many people hear that question and go, oh, well, it's this, it's this, it's this, and they're putting out a lot of their UPG when they do that, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Everybody's personal practice is valid. However, again, there is some doctrine and dogma within foreign said and Norse paganism and heathenry, and people don't like to hear that. And in my personal opinion, the best thing I could do, the best way I could serve somebody that is new to the path and has those questions, especially, hey, I want to change this up in my ritual, or I was thinking about doing this or doing this, I personally would direct them to someone on that level because I think that they would get more out of it. And to not do that, I feel like I would be doing a disservice to them.
I agree. If you're not well versed enough in those concepts, pointing them into the direction of somebody who is more versed in those subjects is, I would say, a really good, smart, and wise thing to do. Two reasons: one, it makes you not an ass, and two, or it makes the situation pointed to the right people, getting them the better understood information instead of just spitting out some nonsense that you don't really know about. So I agree with that. Now, as far as substitution in ritual practice, we know of like 3 or 4 elements in basic bloat rituals and things like that that kind of, they're not necessarily they have to be there, end of story, but it's kind of a good thing to have them in there. Some basic tools. If you don't have those tools, maybe have someone come over and perform those rituals with you who does have those tools to help, because those tools are sacred to those certain rituals, such as a hearth fire, those types of things. Not everyone has the space to have a fire, and if they want to have a bloat ritual, I personally don't believe a candle is going to be enough to represent the hearth. When it comes to other things, such as personal magical practices or sorcery practices, there's always going to be a certain element of, these are the traditional ways that things were done, and these are the traditional things that were used in that, but there's also things that could be substituted for those things if you didn't have access to those things in that place. So not necessarily changing it up with a UPG, whole new invention, but keeping in mind that there's always room, a little bit of wiggle room in your practice, and not every single thing in a ritual has to be 100% to the T of how this person and their tribe do it when they do that ritual. There's always going to be places where, not everyone has a ritual hammer. Not everyone has a ritual hearth fire. Not everyone's going to have a ritual blade. And I'm not talking about an athame. I'm talking about an actual sword or sax. Not everyone's going to have that in their ritual or have access to it. So it's okay to not have certain things when you're doing these things. It's the meat of the performance of how the ritual goes, calling in the Landvetter, the sacred four corners, right? Nostri, Estri, Vestri, and Satri, right? Calling in those great Vetter, and then calling into the gods and your ancestors and opening it up that way, involving things, elements of Galder. If you don't know how to Galder, you can substitute Galder with singing from a place of connection from, you mean this, right? Your intentions. Galder means breath. It means word. It means spoken. So if you don't know how to officially Galder, you can sing those things that you're wanting to relay as a substitution. So I think there's an element of being able to substitute some things, but also not everything should be substituted, if that makes sense.
I hit the wrong button. Okay. Ritual is, many people who practice ritual, you are going to have the equal number of ritual structure, right? But in general, we see this reflected kind of cross cultures, cross practices, where ritual has a opening, a connection, a closing, and a reflection. So and this is kind of reflected in the ceremonial rituals that we see in the sagas. And so we see that they're opening the circle, right? And then they are doing this connection. They're having this giant, this incredible raising of vibration, and then closing out the ritual. Now, when you close out the ritual, I personally, my own personal opinion, okay, believe that this is a reflection of what needs to kind of happen. When you close out a ritual, you are still amped the fuck up. You are still riding that high. You are still dealing with those energies. Even if the official ritual has been closed, the connection was made, the things that you wanted to do were achieved, and you got through that part, there is still this release of energy that I believe needs to happen in that reflection period. And I think that that is why they did Sumbul following a bloat, because the energy is fucking wild. But then we bring it back down to us in the here, in the now, and we funnel that energy into this connection with one another. For my personal rituals, I have a personal practice of when that thing is closed, this moment of grounding and reflection. I also agree that if you are not familiar with these practices, if you don't have your own practice, you do need to seek out someone who can help you, because it shouldn't be an overwhelming experience. You know, it can be, but it shouldn't be. And if it does get to that point, you should understand why that happened, the energies that you were working with, what you might be able to do to create a space that's more comfortable for you, or what you can learn from that experience, right? But I think that that's it is kind of, we are given the example of what to do in the lore even. So that's just my take, but I do believe that all four of those steps need to happen in a rite or a ritual. You do need the closing out, but then you also need to direct that energy somewhere, whether that be reflection, grounding, reconnecting in whatever way is more comfortable for you.
Yep, exactly what Kira just said there about bringing it back into the mundane, bringing it back into your community, bringing it back into yourself and into your daily living spirituality. If not, what have you done it for? You've not put it into living spirituality. It's when we take that energy, when we take that connection, when we take that peace that's so beautiful and bring that back in, and then put it into our lives and put it out into our communities and put it out to those who are in that ritual with us, and we're able to share that experience together, and it adds something, it adds value to us, and we move forward with it. If not, we're allowing it to reach that frenzied set of energy or that fulfilling set of energy, and it sits there for that moment, and then we're not taking it with us. We're learning something. It's feeding our souls by doing it. It's an equal exchange. We are giving that respect. We are giving that offering. We are giving that veneration, and we are receiving back what in gift? That energy, that connection, that wisdom that goes with it. And we have to use it for something. It's a gift in the end that we're receiving. And it's like with anything else. If someone continues to give you that gift just because you seek it, how great is that gift after a while if the gift goes unused? And the gift is bringing that back to our homes, to our families, to our communities, and to the self, and feeding that back through. And if somebody does wish to change something up, I agree with everyone. Please do speak to somebody, because there, everyone who does this sort of practice will say they've known people who've decided to go out on a limb and change something up and not known precisely what they were doing, and ended up in a bit of a pickle in the end. And then they come back to one of those practitioners and say, I need your help. I'm in a bit of a mess. And at that point, you've got a 50-50 chance that if the practitioner has warned you, please don't do this. I'm giving you the best advice I can. Try it this way instead. I'm giving you several options that might work for you, that you feel comfortable with. You pick. And you didn't. And you went ahead and did a thing just because you felt you wanted to do it, and it goes terribly wrong. They're going to make you fix it yourself. They're not going to go in there and fix it for you. If they've taken the time to give you the instruction and the understanding and give you some information over their time of practice, and again, ask multiple people, not just one. Get a few different opinions and advice. But if you're getting the same theme from multiple good practitioners and you choose to not do that, that's risky. It'd be wisdom even for me. If I'm going to do something that I've not done before, I'm going to go ask several other people. I'm going to talk to Nasty, Recon. I'm going to talk to Nans. I'm going to talk to AD. I'm going to talk to Christina. I'm going to get their points of view, and they'll tell me, don't be an idiot. Why are you doing it that way? Even I have to sit back and go, yeah, I didn't think of that one, and change the way I look at it. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame at all. Multiple people ask, and it's good practice.
Absolutely. And I really wanted to hit on that second part of the question because I know like this is probably one of my personal pet peeves, but it's this notion that in heathenry or paganism in general, that there is no wrong way to do something. And while we do have an amount of wiggle room in our practices. There are absolutely some things that I feel um, we shouldn't mess with. There's a difference in making a change out of necessity and making a change out of an ego thing because you want to do something different. So I thank you very much for all that great word of advice. Anyone have any saved rounds on that one? All right, moving into the last one before we open up boxes. Now, this one is a Nan special. I've offered to each. Well, I don't know if I actually told you or not, Roman. I'm sorry if I forgot to. Now that I think about it, but I tried to give everyone, if they had a topic they wanted to bring with them, that we would put it on the card. Nan's want to talk about pre-Viking Age and what it shows us about our spirituality, which I think is a good one to close on because it seems the overwhelming majority of heathens, especially on social media, love to discuss the history, our ancestors. And I don't know a whole lot about, say, the Vendel period, for example, but I can look at it and see that their society was at a much different place and the way that they decorate from the a lot of anthropomorphized features from the amount of decoration that they put into a lot of things. It seems like it was more of a time of celebration versus a time of warfare. That's what I take away from it. But this is a Nan's topic, so I figured I would let him kind of talk about how he wanted this portion to go.
Yeah. So we see from Battle Axe era into the Bronze Age, into the Vendel Age, and then into the Scandinavian Iron Age with the Viking Age, and past that, we see a development of cultural ideas, theologies, and spiritual practices based off of a few things. You got to remember society when you're talking about anthropology and the study of societies and cultures and how they're developed. There's a lot to say about what influences their political agenda, what influences their culture and spiritual ideas based off of the types of food, the availability to those types of foods, and the abundance of those types of food. Because when you have an era coming out of the battle axe era with the hunter-gatherers kind of coming down out of the steeps, migrating to those regions, and hunting and finding things and scavenging for those regions, it was more of the tribalized idea of Germanic paganism, a little more traveling around and not really settling down. And then we get into the Bronze Age. Towards the middle of the Bronze Age, towards the back, we see a little bit of a boost in cultural norms as far as things are a little more abundant, which leads to creativity, more time for art, more time to focus on connecting spiritually, more time to develop those spiritual ideas and those cultural aspects of society. And then even further into the Vendel Age, we have this area in this time frame geologically warming in that part of the world where it was like from then to the Viking Age, at least a good 25 degrees warmer in that region of the world before the Viking Age, where food was a lot easier to grow, food was a lot easier to get and more abundant. So they started trade, right? And with trade comes a boom in economy, and with a boom in economy and prosperity comes a deeper dive into the fine arts and music and craft and storytelling and development of language. And that's around the time when we start to see the alphabets, the Fulthark system starting to be developed is really early Vindel age into, from like maybe year 45 to year 100, we see the first inscriptions of Fulthark system being written, and then shortly after, a few hundred years during the Vindel Age, we see this big explosion of language and written language and rune stones and things like that going around. So when we look at these concepts of how cultures developed around the availability of food and the abundance of food and how that affects society to feel more comfortable to focus on the spiritual and more comfortable to focus on the arts and those types of ideas, you see a vast explosion of cultural development and spiritual ideas starting to develop from that. And we see this in the Nile, around where the Egyptians were. There was a period of time when that area was very, very, very fertile land and this huge epicenter for spirituality and culture. We see in Greece, regions of Greece, where for certain parts of history, geologically, we have the evidence to show where there was lots of humidity that's perfect for growing crops and rich soil and things like that. And each of these different cultures have developed differently with their spiritual practices and stories, kind of based off the region of the world that they were from and the foods that were readily available to grow in that type of prospect. So it really lends a node to a window into a deeper understanding of why the spiritual practices during the Viking Age developed into what they developed into, because we see a Thimblewinter of sorts, so to speak, at the beginning of the Viking Age for about 8 to 10 years, where it started to freeze. They had a deep freeze around the Baltic Sea area up into Scandinavia and into Siberia, which forced them to, now they can't do all the arts and stuff that they were doing. They had to focus more on how are we going to survive, which led to raiding, building ships to explore other regions. And then the focus of spirituality goes more from fertility gods with crops and growing, and gods of poetry and art, more to gods of war and gods of protection and gods of trickery and those things, because the environment of those peoples had changed because the weather had changed, and it changed their ability to have abundance in crops and abundance of food. So then their spiritual practices kind of morphed again.
So really, to the this is such a deep dive, Dan. It's so much. There's so much to cover here, right? Because you're talking about cultural migration. You're talking about, and these are all just factual situations, right? There's a reason why individuals started fishing in different ways, why they started tending crop in different ways, why their artistry changed in certain ways. This is one where people, I've had this discussion, I'll bring it up as just a point, but it pisses a lot of people off, and I think it's something they need to deconstruct for themselves. There is a reason why there is such there are similarities. They're not exactly the same, okay, but there are similarities between Norse, Celt, even up into Slavic paganism. There are a lot of similarities, right? You can look at Celtic knotwork compared to Norse knotwork. A lot of similarities. You can look at the development of agriculture, the development of weaponry, the development of different things that very much not only go into the time period and the society, the economy at those different time periods, but even deeper than that, right, is when you started to have the expansion of trade. It's when you started to have, with that trade, people telling their folklore in different areas. You can find it still today where tribes in Scandinavia that were closer to the bay, their folklore has small variants in it between the people that were still in the mountains. When they speak to their Filga and stuff like that. There are small variances, not huge, but small variances between those different tribes, between where people lived at those times. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing if you look at it. I think that a lot of people do concentrate on just the late Iron Age and don't take the time to look at everything else around it and to concentrate on a single spot of history. You're going to miss a lot. You're going to miss a lot of development within the culture. You can even get into laws, right? I could pull up an entire map that goes into the difference between Frisian law and laws that Sweden had, the laws that Iceland had, the laws that Germany had in those different areas that dealt with different things. And there were variants within those based on the time period, based on the spirituality, the influx of different spirituality into those regions on top of political movements, on top of economic gains or loss, so forth and so on. I mean, you hit it on the head about, the we'll call it Fimbulwinter like you did, because I like that, where they had to start expanding outward, right? They had to look for ways to survive during that time period. And it's not like they just stayed in one spot and was like, oh, by luck, we survived. No, there was intuition around it. There was conversations they had with other travelers, other tribes, people that they would see that they'd be like, oh, wow, hey, I really dig the way you cropped that. I really dig the way you work the soil to get that. I really like that art piece. Maybe I'm going to, can take some of that and integrate it into the way I do my own art. Knotwork is a prime example of that. If you look at knotwork, the variances are very, very small. And it developed, and it continued to develop, and it'll continue to develop. And I think that it's something people really do need to look into is cultural migration, anthropology, even the political ideology at the time and the way it developed and the way it changed through the time periods, based even on the kings at that point, especially in Scandinavia. You could see a huge variance of it. And anybody that, hasn't read enough on it, that thinks that, there wasn't a distaste that our ancestors had, certain tribes of our ancestors especially, that were like, yeah, F you, Christian. I'm not going to deal with what you want me to do. However, because of the laws and because of who my king is or who the leader of the area is at this point, yeah, no problem, I'll do the sign of the cross to you, and when I get home, I'm going to take out my own stuff. I'm going to do my own personal practice, right? Paganism didn't just completely die out, especially when you look at Iceland and stuff like that. Iceland was definitely one of the last true strongholds for Norse paganism, staying as close as possible, as close as they could get it to be to what they learned and what their families and their tribes did from Scandinavia. But that doesn't mean that it was gone in Scandinavia either. You had a variance in tribal practice in Scandinavia. I'm sure even in Iceland, you had different families that had a little bit of a variance in their practice. But that's where we get to. The foundation is there, right? The base work is there. It was just things that developed, had small variants, small changes, whether that be art, economics, politics, agriculture, the whole nine. So, yeah, definitely. Nans and I have talked about this too much, and this live could go for hours just on this one subject, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's massive. And I mean, I am a nerd and I do love my migration studies. That's something I dig into on a regular basis because I think it has great input for people if they do understand where the people of the different regions came from, where those tribes came, even the three Germanic tribes, looking at the Isiavonis, the Armenonis, and the Ingiavonis, and where they came from and where they brought their belief structure in, what would then became the German tribes and then moved on through the Nordic lands. Understanding where they came from before that. What was the political situation from where they came from? What was the environmental situation where they came from? What were the factors that led them out? Which deities were they worshiping and which variations of the names were they calling them and why? Was it based upon the need they had in that land that they came from versus the new need? Maybe they were one of the tribes that was sitting coastal and their need there was more related to fishing and water and shipping, and they were having and trade in that way. So they're going to move their practice over to something that's more beneficial there if they came from an inland area to begin with. And ignoring those migration studies, I think, leaves people out of a lot of information. They can close themselves down in a modern practice to a box that it has to be A, B, C, because this is what it is now. And it may be what we do now in our modern worldview because we've changed. We're now in a different location. We're now in a different situation. We now have different resources. Maybe we must look at ourselves in the modern era too, in relation to the migration area, even the Merovingian period, of where they got their beliefs from, and us not be so closed-minded to other people's beliefs now, because we have migrated. We have new ways of gathering our food and surviving, and we have new threats, whether that be war or strife politically at home or whatever we're facing. Our view on which deities or practices that we think we need are going to change based upon our circumstances and our modern worldview, the way theirs changed from where they migrated from. So I try to go back as far as I can, and it's the Norse animist in me, and the shamanistic side of my practice of trying to find the Siberians. Overwatch mentioned it, where shamanism comes from and where the practices moved into, and how there were shared practices, how once travel and trade became a thing that people just didn't sit at home and go, okay, I'm just going to sit here in my quiet view. I'm traveling. What are they talking about? What are they practicing? What's going on over here with the mystery schools? What's going over here in mythology? Let's see where we meet in the middle. This is fascinating. Or no, I'm not interested in that at all. But they're bringing those stories back home, and they're bringing them back to their tribes, and they're sharing their journeys and their experiences with their families. And we are not one to sit here and say, okay, we can close them down and say they did or did not definitely do this or that when it came to their spiritual practice, because as Overwatch also said, and Nan's brought it up as well, from tribe to tribe, they may have disliked each other with a passion, not only just from a different belief, spiritual belief, but even from tribe to tribe and nodal point to nodal point that would consider themselves Norse paganism, as we would call it today, didn't get along. Maybe this tribe venerated these specific deities because of their location, again, based on inland or crops or fertility or water and sea or warfare and trade, versus the other. There was always going to be those differences. And I think we have to look at that as well in our modern worldview. And there's good lessons.
Absolutely. This is not an area that I am knowledgeable in at all. The migration studies, I really enjoy listening to Realm. Realm is one of the most knowledgeable people in this area that I have ever met, and she is a wealth of knowledge. This is one of those areas where I'm just like, I like to sit back and listen. I have nothing to add of value. So I continue to learn a lot every time I listen to these conversations. But yeah, I really don't have anything to add about pre-Viking Age spirituality.
You bring value to being here, Kira. We appreciate you.
You bring.
The only thing I want to add to this is the development of cultural understanding of linguistics that happens with the change of culture and the new words and the new development of those things. And we get a window into the language barriers and the different ideas of proper etymology from back then versus modern day etymology. Yes, there's an element of things changing, and we see it. It's historical fact. When we're specifically talking about kind of deconstructing the inner mindset and ideas and beliefs that were written down in Snorri's work and the Elder Eddas and any of the manuscripts we have from those regions, it's really important also to look at what those words meant during that time to those cultures and those peoples at that time versus what we associate them with modernly.
Yep.
So I got about 20 more minutes that I can allow, and then rather than take that 20 minutes and then asking further questions, because I can bug Nance about this offline, because he gave me his phone number the other day. I figured now would be a good time, unless you guys have anything else you want to do, that we could open up the remaining boxes for anyone that might have questions. And the questions do not have to be related to these four topics specifically. Just anyone out there that might have a question on heathenry or commentary on anything you've heard, now is your time to let us know.
Someone's asking for more on the second subject, more on the Vether.
Yeah, you're gonna tackle hard as fuck, man. This close to me in a box.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in my room.
Feedback.
All right, Eric, let's start with you.
Just he's going back to his room because he was sitting right next to me. And I was like, dude, that is going to cause.
Oh. Okay. Well, is that Shadow then? Or can we just move on? What do you got for us?
Yeah, it's Shadow. And I was saying I enjoy this conversation, and I wanted to add to it, like, that's why I believe it's important to, like, I was blessed that my great grandparents, they're still alive, and that my great great grandparents were still alive as I was coming up, because, like, I know that my great grandfather, he's from the Muskogee tribe. I know that. I know my great grandmother, she's Norwegian and Cuban. She was raised in Cuba, but I know that her father is from Norway, but his parent his go back to them settling in the Middle East, and then from the Middle East coming to Cuba. I know also that I come from through the bloodline of Santeria in Cuba, that I come from Africa, because Santeria is African practice. It was, before it was Santeria, it was Regla de Ocha, right? And that's an African practice. So I talking to them and learning about that, like, and that's what I think is different. The biggest practices in my family, if it had nothing to do with the reservation, it was Norse paganism and Santeria, right? There was no like, yes, now my father, he's a Christian, stuff like that, but there was none of that. So it was easier to, like, know exactly what was going on, because my family, they always practiced what was native to their country. Like the Cuban side, they practiced Santeria because that was what they were before Catholicism ever touched Cuba or South America, anything like that. That's what they were. And I always thought that's what, like, that helped me on my journey, is I know this. I have these teachings. I had these conversations. They've told me, they've heard, they know. And that's what I wanted to add to it.
Well, I appreciate it. Anyone got any thing to bounce off of that before we toss it over to Eric? All right. Well, we appreciate it, Shadow. Eric, you're up.
Hi. All right, here we go. So I'm quickly, because we only got 20 minutes, so I'm gonna make this very quick, and then I'll jump on my live after you end yours. If you guys want to go in deeper detail to it. Quickly, the first one, deconstruction. One of the biggest things I talk about deconstruction is what I said in my comment section, and it's kind of bouncing off of what Nan said. And what absolutely, like, something that drives me crazy is speaking in absolutes. Yes, Nan, you can absolutely look at this as stories, but then again, at the same time, there are going to be practitioners like myself that look at it as sacred text, as you put it, biblical, right? These are stories. I literally believe in these stories. And faith and prayer and these words are not synonymous with Christian ideology, and that's when I tell people they need to deconstruct. It's because somebody having faith or somebody believing this is not a Christian concept. Faith is absolutely universal, and many people are going to see it many different ways. Nance, you're absolutely correct in the way you want to see it, and I'm absolutely correct the way I want to see it. And neither one of those viewpoints are inherently Christian. When people come across me and they see my devotion and my level of faith that I have to things, they're like, "Oh, that's very Christian mindset." No. Once again, the Christians did not fucking have a monopoly on fucking devotion and faith. That's not something that is inherently Christian. That is inherently just faith. So there's that. So that's one quick touch one. As far as the land Vitir, I just want to add on to what Overwatch 6. He basically said everything that I was going to say, except for one other thing, which is the land Vitir for me is an easy path, right? And I'm not discrediting anybody that wants to work with the land. I just say that I constantly work with the land. I'm in harmony with them, much like Overwatch is, and I'm always part of that. That's easy for me. So I don't focus on that. I focus more on the deities because the good deities don't give a fuck about you. I don't have to get the land's attention. It's very easy to get the land's attention because I work with them all the time, whereas it's much more difficult to actually get the deities' attention. And that's why for me, like, land falls at the absolute last part of my practice, because land is just something that I do. I get my food off of it. I live off of it. I'm constantly in harmony with it. So it's a constant everyday thing, where the deities is an earned structure. That's that point. Ritual ceremony, is it structured? Overwatch said absolutely everything that I said because we were literally talking about it on the couch while you guys were talking. So he said everything I wanted to say perfectly. Lastly, does any of that history and all that stuff you guys are talking about, migration study and all that, how does it affect spirituality? In my opinion, it fucking doesn't, or at least it shouldn't, right? And as much as I shit on Lokians, that's been one of the big debates right now, is that people are like, "Oh, there's no historical evidence that the Lokians were that anybody ever prayed to Loki," and it's like, that's great, that's fine, but that doesn't say that the Lokians don't have a spiritual connection to Loki. The history shouldn't affect your faith. That's what faith is, and it's affect your spirituality. I don't give a fuck what any of the ancestors did or the migration studies. None of that has anything to do with my practice now, And and I'm sorry, but if you're so wishy-washy in your faith that learning the oldest traditions move things around, then you don't really have faith, in my opinion. Moreover to that, it's one of those things where, we are never going to get a definitive answer of why they did it. It could be a practice from whatever age you want to pick. Could that be seriously significant to our ancestors, or it could be a turkey oven situation. And if you guys don't know that, I can go into that. Like, that's a common thing that I coined a long time ago with my family's traditions. So it doesn't, and that's, at least in my opinion, and that's my thing. And I'll elaborate more on my page or in here if I have to. But those are my 4 things that I wanted to add to it.
I mean, Eric, you and I've had conversations about this constantly. Kira's been part of them. Nans has been part of them. Rome and I have had some, not as many deep conversations, but, we have had some conversations. And the one thing that I had a discussion with Griff about one time, because, Griff asked me, he was like, well, how do you know that within Fornsid, within the Norse path, that your path is correct? How do you not know that somebody else's is incorrect? And my literal response to him was personal belief and faith. The reality is that I have to agree that the thing that it's good to ask questions. It's good to gain knowledge and wisdom. It's good to research. It's good to study, because spirituality is part of culture. It's inherently tied. So if you don't understand culture, then you may be missing important aspects of spirituality. However, at the end of the day, my spirituality, my personal practice, my steadfastness in my spirituality, my faith, is based on the fact that I don't have a better way to say it than blind faith. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, there's stuff out there that I can read, I can research, I can look at, but at the end of the day, I believe what I believe because I believe it. And there's nobody that can rock my personal belief based on a discussion or debate. They can add to, they can make it better, they can make it stronger, but they will never make it weaker. And, that's one of the things where a topic that comes up all the time. I mean, He the Nerd, you dealt with it the other day. right? And there are people in this chat that dealt with it the other day. Arguing just to hear yourself talk does nobody a benefit. Does benefit to no one. Not everybody is going to be right. However, fact is fact. What we have historically is historically proven. SPG and VPG are always going to be able to be proven easier and with much more ease than UPG. UPG is your personal practice. I'm not going to argue somebody's personal practice. You know, and people get offended by this. Well, they say you shouldn't teach with UPG. They say you shouldn't teach with UPG. When you're talking about the base foundation work of a spirituality like Norse paganism, Thorne said, heathenry, you have to be cautious with that. Because what ends up happening is someone that hasn't done the study, that doesn't have the knowledge of someone else that they could go ask and have that discussion and have some humility about themselves and take it in and actually learn from it, you're going to go teach something that is not inherently part of that. And then you're going to start tying in occultism. And then you're going to start tying in Wiccan. And then you're going to start tying in all these things. And at the end of the day, you end up with a beautiful knot of disaster Harley Quinn work. And you've lost the base foundation of where you're going. However, people can have multiple practices within their personal practice and not interblend, right? That's why it's your personal practice.
Well, and I think that that's the thing that people get caught up on all the time. We are not ever saying that you shouldn't have UPG. In fact, I believe strongly that you should have UPG. That tells me that you are making a personal connection on your path with the beings that you're working with. You're making a personal connection with deity. You are getting to know you're getting to know the Vatiri. You're getting to know your ancestors. Have UPG. I think that people misunderstand when we say that teaching from a point of UPG or trying to die on that hill is unwise and kind of silly. It's pointless. It goes nowhere. It's cyclical. It's just word salad, right? But I don't want that to get mistaken for not having UPG, you know? So that's the clear distinction that I wanted to add real quick.
And just because I see it in the comment section, I'll do this as fast as I can. So the turkey in the oven thing and how it goes into the historical stuff. Family practice, right? My mom was learning the family recipe, how to make turkey on Thanksgiving dinner. And the first step to our family recipe is cut the turkey in half. My mom asked my grandma, why do we cut the turkey in half? My grandma goes, I don't know. I never really thought about it. Your grandma told me to do that. So they called my grandma, and my grandma's answer was, because a full turkey won't fit in an oven. And she's not wrong. During her time and age growing up, the turkey didn't fit in the oven as a whole turkey. So cutting it in half is not necessary. So again, this is why when I say, like, is historical some of the stuff they did historically and then the practices they did, is it because it was actually really important, or was it just because that was the means and means that they had? Is they had to do it this way because their ovens wouldn't fit a full turkey, right? So always keep that in, and you're never going to get an answer to that because until one of us invents a time machine, which I'm working on.
To what Overwatch said. So me and my father, we had a conversation yesterday. Everything that my father was raised with, he's given up for Christianity, which is fine. I don't care. But he said something to me. He was like, you know, the Bible, it says, I don't care what you believe in, but you can't believe in this and believe in that. You have to choose one, right? And so I said to my father, I was like, that's crazy, because you're the same person that when we go hunting, right? You revert back to what you were. You revert back to what you grew up with, and you give thanks to the ancestors and everything. But in the same breath, and then I said, do you see what I'm saying, Dad? Like, how we were raised was, this is your bloodline. You have this, and that, right? Your ancestors from each of these things, Santeria, from the reservation, from your Norse bloodline, they're going to speak to you because those are your ancestors, right? And that's okay. You honor you honor your ancestors, right? So when me and him, we have these conversations, I'm saying, I was like, Dad, this is no way, you know, I love everybody and whatever they believe in, but I was like, Dad, you can't say this to me and my siblings, that this is what this is and this is why you do, but in the same breath, when we go to do certain things, you're going against what you're saying you believe now, because in your heart you know what your ancestors are, you know what you feel, as like you came to America and you got in this mindset that this is what you had to be because of this, and now you're in a constant battle with yourself.
No, that's on point, Shadow. I mean, especially when you get to the hunting thing, that's something that I personally was brought up with, and it actually came from my mother, who was Celt pagan. Her brother and stuff took me hunting and was like, okay, well, we use every part of this. Not only we do use every part of this, but we thank the land in the area, we thank the animal, we thank everything about this, right? You give thanks to the fact that you were able to come across that deer at that moment, that you were able to harvest that deer at that moment, that the deer allowed you to harvest it, so forth and so on. And it's, I agree. Everybody has ancestors that aren't necessarily just Norse or from Scandinavia, right? And that whole thing is where ancestral veneration, you should take recognition of all your ancestors, because without them, you wouldn't be who you are.
I just want to touch base back on the history thing. History, the reason why it's important to understand the philosophies of history and where the things kind of came from and having a look at it, is because without the history, if we didn't have that history, if the Eddas didn't exist, if we didn't have artifacts from the Viking Age, we would have no knowledge of these spiritual practices, and they wouldn't exist. So when we're looking at the history from the Vendel Age, from the Battle Axe era into the Viking Age, and looking at the cultural development of those things, it gives us a node into understanding why things developed the way that they did, so that we can build a base off of our own connection in faith. Because without it, we have no understanding of it. If there was no history there and we didn't have that evidence, there's nothing to build faith off of, because the faith wouldn't exist. It's like academics. You take academics. If you take academics just as academics and you don't look at it as a philosophy to build your own spiritual understanding off of, to build your own faith off of, you have no faith, you have no spirituality, because there's nothing behind it to get the notion from. There's nothing behind it to build an understanding of who these gods were. There's nothing behind it to build an understanding of those cultural practices, because the history wouldn't be there. You have to have the history to get a window into what things were, so you have an idea of what spiritual concepts are to build your faith off of.
If I may attempt to paraphrase, and I like to do that by kind of like trying to rephrase your idea in a different one to see if it sticks. But it kind of seems like you're saying through the analyzation and understanding of, say, the Vendel period or the Battle Axe period, we would be able to look at something like cooking a turkey and figure out why it might have been done that way and whether or not that has utility in our modern time. Eric, would you like to respond?
I would, but I can't. So I don't have the words for it quite yet. I'll have to ponder on this one, because I wildly disagree with you in every context. Because and I just don't have a formulated argument as to why. I mean, I know it's up here. I just can't get it down here quite yet. And I think and I'll work on it. We'll talk about it a little more later. But I think off the top of my head, the thing about it is I don't give a fuck if it's because the ancestors sailed more, then they started praying to Njord, or because of this age they went more with Odin. Because again, when it comes to the pantheon of Norse paganism, they and you do study history, they've all had their place, right? All the deities have their place, but who calls to you? Who calls to you is who calls to you, and history has fuck all to do with that. At least in my walk. Like, I don't care that this age pray to Uller or this age pray to Tyr or this one. It's like, those are the gods that work with me, that I work with, that I connect with, and the history has nothing to do with that. You know, if that makes sense. And I'll have to formulate it better. Because I know I'm not.
Question: would you know the name of that god if it was not for the Eddas being there?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I would say yes.
I would.
Yes,
and this is this is why I jumped up to get into this one with Nans. Okay. Think of it like a child's mind, where I don't have all the Christian deconstruction that needs to go on. I wasn't raised Christian. I was never involved in Christianity, or was never taught in my home growing up. What was an old belief. All right. And with that, it was not taught from the Eddas. It was taught from stories brought down, not with archaeological evidence, not with anything else. It was brought from family lineage all the way down. We didn't get into the theological and everything else into that until we were old enough to grab those books ourselves and start doing research on what it is, why our faith, if we chose or felt that connection, to continue that family line. And so, no, I was well into my double digits in age. When I say double digits, it's because 10, 11, 12, 13, going up, being able to comprehend then what I was going to read, and not just feeling what's around me, that energy, that association with what I was being told, or the stories that were being sung to me through the family, the tales that I was raised with. So before I even had the recollection to go pick up that Edda and read that book, I had fuck all clue what it was. But because those stories were passed down, and the gods Uller, the gods Eden or Idun, however you want to pronounce it. You want to talk about Sif, you want to talk about Loki, you want to talk about Odin, Thor, Frigga, Freya, all of them. You want to get into Golveg, you want to get into the rest of them. Those were stories that were told around that fireplace or the hearth in that house that I lived in. So again, that child's recognition of, no, we don't know what that is until we step into an adult comprehension of understanding then that book over here that says Edda, or that over there that says Havamal, what all that is. We don't read that. Now, this is the difference between North American heathenry and the way some was raised. So it's vastly different coming into our spiritual path. And that connection for some of us starts when the minute you hit the ground running and you can feel what you feel. And you know it's there. And finding that deep-seated connection that has no written word. It has no meaning other than that soul connection, those soul parts that reach and go, hey, I know what you are. Talk to me.
Well said, AD.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you nailed it, because that's exactly what I was going to say. It's a feeling. Again, it's kind of like, I don't remember who said it, but it was talking about like the different migration studies and the different names. Why they call Odin Woden? Because it's a fucking language. Who gives a shit? I've said this before when I first came on TikTok. Like, when people are like, "Oh, I don't pronounce the words correctly," and I struggle with the words with the Old Norse language, and it's like, and I don't care, and I remember Scarwolf, me and him were talking. He's like, "I'm sorry, man, I say them with a southern twang, and I know I'm not pronouncing the names correctly." Who gives a shit? You feel it. You work with Odin, which he says in I can't do a southern accent, but he says it in a very southern accent. It doesn't sound like Odin, but again, it's the same thing. Who gives a shit what the fucking old ancestors did or said or anything like that? I know the feeling of what I feel. I know the energies of what I feel. I know what it feels like when I go out there and I work with the land or or my ancestors, and I know what energies I feel when I work with a deity and what name he has. I don't give a fuck, because all of it, in my opinion, all of it is Norse paganism. All of it. Every spiritual path is Norse paganism, just confused and bastardized based because of language. And you guys have heard me talk about this one before. This is the subject I really pissed Pops off with, because he was like, "Are you saying that I'm just a confused druid who's actually practicing Norse paganism?" Yes. And I take that stance because, again, the creation story. If you truly believe, like, and again, Nance, to use your words, in a biblical sense, that these are sacred texts and this actually happened, that means there was a creation story, our creation story. And I believe in our creation story fully. I believe that we were made from Ask and Embla, and I believe that Heimdall banged 3 classes of men into existence. And men, I mean men as in mankind. So all of it is just migration studies and language changes, but the practices, the feelings, the energies, none of these change. So it doesn't matter.
Not to mention that feeling and that energy goes through your soul parts. It comes from your lineage, no matter where your ancestors come from. And while I have most of y'all know that I do have dual practices, but I don't cross my spiritual paths. They don't mix. It's the same. It's 2 very different sides of a coin. I'm the coin, and 2 sides very much are different, but no matter how you bend that coin, those 2 sides are never going to touch. But they reside in me along with my ancestors and what I connect with. And that's what matters. Everything else is a bonus, because then I know where it comes from, why, who, and all the, now thanks to modern DNA, I can trace it back to day 1, but then that gets a little, sometimes I don't think I want to know. It's like, no. But those are important things too. Once you find what brought you here in the first place, anybody can pick up a book, whether or not you watched a TV show, whether or not you are a fan of Marvel. What was your connection? What sparked in you? So, hey, there's that connection. It brought you here. It brought you to it. Okay, build that connection. Find that deep-seated root that just grows within you. The lore is there to help guide once you find that spark.
And it's funny because Eric and AD, y'all remind me of my grandfather in a sense, because like the other day I asked him, I said, hey, Pop, have you ever read the Eddas? And he said exactly to me, he said, my grandfather is an Olafson. Why this is me. I can recite it. I've never picked it up. He's like, this has been bred in me. I've never picked it up. He was like, why? Do you have them? I said, yeah, yes, I do. He was like, why? Do you not remember all the stories I told you, your great grandfather told you? You don't remember being 5 and your great great grandfather telling you the stories? I was like, I mean, but I wanna. He was like, you have the blood of a old. He's prideful in the fact that his knowledge is his knowledge. He did not have to. He doesn't have to read, because he's like, I know this because it came from passed down generation to generation, and even till now, I know this. This is what I am.
All right. We had one more come up real quick, and I figured I'd give him a chance to speak. And after that, I gotta go get in the shower and get ready for the fun to continue again tomorrow. However, before I do that, if you guys enjoyed this, I am thinking about trying to structure some more of these, and starting off with like a different 4 guests, different 4 topics, and just try to facilitate fruitful discussion within the community. So if you guys see me pop into your little inboxes, that'll probably be why. And if you guys are into it, be sure to let me know.
Just want to say awesome job, guys. Y'all have a wonderful night.
I didn't even really get to fucking say anything, because as soon as I walked in, I started glitching out. And I was about to chuck my phone at the goddamn wall. This pisses me off. Verizon is going to get these fucking hands, dude.
They deserve it.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, they fucking do. I pay $100 a month, and this is what I get.
All right. So what did you want to say though?
You're coming.
I was throw a comment to Sin while she was still in here. I don't know if she's still in here, but like, yeah, I thought she was talking about like other names for Njord, the sea god, because you know how like in the Viking Age the name of Thor was Thor, and Proto-Norse era, like, in Old High German, when they were speaking Old High German and writing in Proto-Norse, it was Thunras. So I thought she was using like the Proto-Norse name for Njord, and I just wanted to like say it out loud because I didn't have enough characters to type it. That's really all I wanted a box for.
All right. Has anyone got any saved rounds? All right. Well, thank you all for stopping by. I thought it went really well, and hopefully everybody who listened in and participated found something beneficial in it.
Thank you for facilitating it. It was really fun.
It was awesome being here, man.
Appreciate it.
You guys have a good night.
You too.
Night.
Bye.